just because a church may not sign your paycheck does not mean you left ministry.
Right.
I think if Jesus were walking the earth today, Monday through Friday, you would find him in the food banks, and you would find him in the homeless shelters, and you'd find him at Habitat for Humanity working on housing. I mean, you would find him in the nitty gritty work of nonprofits that minister directly to people. And so just because you're not necessarily on staff at a church does not mean you've left the ministry. God just has something different for you.
Welcome to the Care for Pastors podcast. We're glad you're here. Our vision is simple but powerful: to see pastoral families persevere in ministry, develop healthy churches, and lead in community transformation. This podcast exists to encourage you, challenge you, and provide practical resources along with real stories of hope to help you and your family thrive. Our heart is not just that you would survive ministry, but that you would prevail in your personal life, your family, and in your calling. So stay tuned for today's episode, hosted by Robby Bolden. Welcome to Care for Pastors. I'm your host, Robby Bolden, and today's conversation is one that every pastor, pastor's wife, and ministry leader really needs to hear. Ministry is a calling, and there are a lot of joys, but it can also be full of deep pain. For some, the most difficult season doesn't come from the culture outside the church, but from within it. What happens when a pastor is forced out? When a faithful family is blindsided? When the calling remains but the position is gone? Today we're joined by Deanna Harrison, co-founder of the Pastors Hope Network, a ministry devoted specifically to pastors and families who've lost their ministry position. Deanna shares her own story of loving pastoral life for over 30 years, only to experience a sudden and devastating termination that changed everything. From grief and anger to rebuilding and a renewed calling, her journey is one of honesty, resilience, and hope. We'll talk about the trauma of forced resignation, the importance of prioritizing marriage in ministry, and the long road of forgiveness and how God can birth a new mission out of deep pain. If you've ever wrestled with bitterness, confusion, or the stigma that follows ministry loss, this conversation will remind you that you're not alone and that there is help available. Whether you're currently serving, recovering, or walking alongside someone who is hurting, this episode will encourage you to guard your marriage, protect your heart, and to trust God that He is still writing a redemptive story. Let's dive into this conversation with Deanna Harris. Well, Deanna, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Robby. Thrilled to be here.
Good. Now, Deanna, you have been a partner with Care for Pastors through the Pastors Hope Network for 7 years now.
Yes.
It kind of began with our PK ministry, where you met our PK director, Chrissy, and just started sending kids to her. So before we get into all of that, kind of just tell us a little bit about you and Scott and your life and ministry.
Okay. Well, I've been married to Scott for 47 years. I got married very, very, very young. And we have 2 adult children, a son and a daughter. And we have 3 grandsons who are just so much fun. Lots of fun. We now live in the Denver area, where my husband is on staff at a church in Denver. And we're just really loving being here and thrilled to be on this podcast today.
Now, when you met Scott, did you ever dream you'd be a pastor's wife?
Well, yes. I hadn't before I met him. I watched. My dad had been a pastor and then worked for the denominational offices the last part of his ministry career. But when I met Scott, he was in seminary. But until that time, I had not ever entertained the thought of, I think I'll marry a pastor. I want to go find a pastor. No, it hadn't even crossed my mind. But I think maybe growing up in a pastor's home, God used that to prepare me for ministry. And definitely my mom I didn't realize it at the time when I was growing up, but she was a role model to me when I became a pastor's wife.
Well, that's neat. Yeah. So being a PK didn't deter you from marrying a pastor.
It did not. Now, part of that may be that I was in, I guess, the fourth grade whenever he went to work for the denominational offices, and
Okay.
so did not have that stigma
Mm-hmm.
of being a PK during those teenage years. And I
Right.
think that's probably made a big difference.
Okay.
I loved, when I was a kid, I loved being at the church all the time. That was my second home. I loved it. But then as a teenager, I might not have loved it quite as much. So working with the denomination meant that we lived in a large city. So no one at my school knew what my dad did.
Right. Right.
So
Hold
I
on.
didn't have that
That.
baggage.
Well, yes. Well, you avoided some challenges there then apparently.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Deanna, tell us about ministry life and what it was like being a pastor's wife and kind of what led to this whole ministry of Pastors Hope Network.
Okay. Well, I will tell you that I was the ideal pastor's wife. I
Oh wow.
loved being a pastor's wife.
Mm-hmm.
There was no one I wanted to hear preach other than my husband. I loved hearing him preach. I loved being involved in the church. Over the years, he pastored for over 30 years, and in that time frame, I directed the college ministry. I was the church organist. I rang handbells. I loved doing hospital visits. There was no aspect of ministry that I didn't enjoy. So, yeah, I loved it, which is one reason why what we experienced was so devastating. And that was 17 years ago. We experienced a coup led by a disgruntled staff person. And literally from the time we knew something was wrong to the time we were told to leave was 12 days.
Oh wow.
There was no due process. There had been what I later learned was this was not being fired for cause because there was nothing. He had done nothing to deserve this treatment. We were terminated, and the process of termination involves secret meetings, psychological abuse, all the planned, the behind the scenes things that took place that we were completely unaware of because these secret meetings took place when my husband was out of town on church business. So yeah, it was brutal. It was the most brutal thing we'd ever gone through. Thankfully, our kids were already either in college or out of college. Our daughter she was in her first year of her career out of college. So thankfully, they did not have to experience firsthand. They were not having to go to school, with church kids and experience that kind of awkwardness. But it was so incredibly destructive. And so, yeah, we eventually moved back to our home state and literally rebuilt our lives. Ministry is all we had either one of us ever known.
Right.
Church ministry, direct church ministry. And so it was a matter of just rebuilding.
Right.
We moved back to our home state to be close to family and to be close to people who loved us and knew who we were and didn't believe all the stuff that was
Yeah.
said that just wasn't true. Yeah.
So Deanna, I think a lot of our listeners have experienced something similar to you and Scott, right?
Right.
And I think one of the biggest things that we talk about here at Care for Pastors when we have a couple who come in who've experienced what you guys have experienced, the enemy kind of just creeps in after that season, right? And just begins to anger, bitterness, frustration, believing the lies. What was that like for you both when you left?
Well, literally the very first week after we had to resign, I went to the bookstore and I bought a book by Lewis Smedes on forgiveness, because I knew in my head that I was expected to forgive.
Right.
And I did not want a spirit of anger to take root. And so, in a way, I had approached it from a standpoint of, this is not going to destroy my faith. I refuse to let it destroy my faith. But my husband and I each traveled different roads as far as grieving. And what I tell our clients now, that because I firmly believe this, when you mentioned the anger and all those different emotions,
Right.
those are part of grief. Those are all the elements of grief. And so the anger, you better know I was angry. I was furious. And I will tell you that 17 years later, sometimes anger might rear its head again. Right. I learned through all this that forgiveness is a process. It's not something you just say, oh, I forgive them for that, and move. You have to do the hard work. You have to deal with all the different steps. But for me, it was a matter of having to grieve the loss, to deal with the anger, and then to just say, what does God have now? I mean, what is, it took years. It really did. I mean, it was probably a full 2 years, 18 months at least, before we could go to a small group in a church. We always attended church. We never, ever said, I just don't want to go today. In fact, the first Sunday that we had no place to go, after we were forced to resign, my husband said, we're going to go to church somewhere Sunday. I need you to pick a place to go. And thankfully, we lived in a very large metropolitan area. And so there was a very, very large church of a different denomination from us. And I said, that's where we're going, because we could go and be invisible. And that's where we went. But we never stopped going. And because my husband's attitude was, we are commanded to worship. Worship is not an option. We are going to worship. So where are we going to go? So we went to that mega church until we eventually moved back to our home state. And we lived with my father-in-law for 7 months until we could figure out what we were doing. And there was a small church in that area, and we started going to that church. And again, another denomination from ours that we'd always been a part of. And we continued to worship, and going to a smaller place was even we were being very vulnerable. And so we literally rehearsed what we were going to say when people said, what do you do? What kind of work are you, Right. I mean, all that. Eventually we found jobs and moved to another town, and we found a church, but it took a while before we felt comfortable going to a small group. I mean, it just, it's just so difficult. It's so painful. We hadn't been together in a Sunday school class or a Bible class, in our married life, because Scott was always preaching and I was always teaching a class. Right. So it was just a very different experience. Yeah.
So, I'd like to ask you about you and Scott. You know, it was Scott's job that put you guys in that position. How did you and Scott work through that dynamic, and did it ever occur to you that I am never doing this again as a pastor's wife?
No, it did that. Not the idea of never doing it again. In fact, if Scott had wanted or felt God calling him to pastor again, I would have been behind him all the way. I I've heard pastors' wives say I was called to be a pastor's wife. I was called to be Scott's wife. That's my calling, was to be Scott's wife. And so and I never saw it as Scott's job, although yeah, it was his employment, but we were a team, you know. And so even though I wasn't in that last deacons meeting, you know, because officially I wasn't an employee, I wasn't employed, but man, my heart was there, and we were a team. The thing that held us together is because we always put our marriage first. Our marriage always took top priority. And I'm not saying, you know, God came second. I'm not saying that.
Right.
But when it comes to the church or our marriage came first. Scott always put me first. And in fact, in the first church we served in after being married, I came home from work one day and I'd had a very traumatic experience at work. I mean, I was a basket case. It was on a Wednesday night, and Scott called one of the deacons in our church, and he said, "Something's come up. I need you to cover prayer meeting." And the guy said, "Sure, never ask any questions." And Scott took me out to dinner. We went to a mall and just walked around. He literally put into action that I came before the church.
That's awesome.
And that just meant the world to me. And when we had kids, our kids always came before the church. One of the greatest statements I ever read in a book, and I cannot remember the title of the book, but I was reading it right after we were in our early years of ministry. I think it was written by Gordon MacDonald. But anyway, a pastor had asked his mentor, which should come first, my marriage or my ministry? And the mentor said, your marriage is your ministry.
Yes.
If you lose one, you've lost the ministry, you know. And so when our church forced us to resign, it was literally the two of us. That was it. Our kids were out of the house, and I remember standing in our kitchen and we looked at each other and said, I've got you and you've got me, and that's all we knew. That was it. That was the only stable thing in our lives right then, was that we had each other.
Yep. I think you just said two things that every pastor and pastor's wife needs to hear. First, God was first, no matter what. Secondly, your marriage was your priority, your ministry. And I know you talk to a lot of pastors and their families, and you know this. So many of them have put ministry above their family that it's led to them being wrecked and their ministry even coming to an end.
Yeah.
And they split and part ways. But you guys were able to weather the storm because of your relationship to the Lord and to each other.
Yeah. Yeah, we weathered the storm because, I mean, at that time we had 40 plus years invested in our marriage. And we knew all, you know that your kids are going to grow up and they're going to leave the nest. I mean,
Right.
you've got each other, and that's what you need to focus on. And I will say were rarely times, there were very few times where it was a decision, the church or us, I mean, but he had proven to me that first church that he pastored that, yeah, I did come first. If it came down to I have to have you, he was going to call somebody to cover for him. And but yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's not an easy vocation.
Right.
And so, yeah, you just have to take care of each other.
Yeah. So you guys get started in this small church, and you start going to life group.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing Scott's not pastoring at this moment.
He never has gone back to pastoring
Okay.
full time, but in that area where we lived, he served as interim pastor, and we lived in that area for 10 years, and it'd take me a while to count up the number of churches. He was almost always, he might have a couple of months between interims, but he stayed busy. We loved it. And in every place he served as interim, they wanted him to stay as their pastor.
Oh, that's
And
sweet.
it was very sweet, but he was like, yeah, no, not going down that road before. God gave us new ministries in the area of nonprofit work. So one thing I tell our clients now is just because a church may not sign your paycheck does not mean you left ministry.
Right.
I think if Jesus were walking the earth today, Monday through Friday, you would find him in the food banks, and you would find him in the homeless shelters, and you'd find him at Habitat for Humanity working on housing. I mean, you would find him in the nitty-gritty work of nonprofits that minister directly to people. And so just because you're not necessarily on staff at a church does not mean you've left the ministry. God just has something different for you.
So how did this experience and challenge that you guys faced as a family, how did that lead to Pastors Hope Network? Where did all that come to mind?
Yeah, good question. We were living in this area, like I said, for doing nonprofit work, and it was probably about 5 years after resignation, after being terminated, that I really felt like God called me, telling me I was to write an account of our journey. And the first time I sat down to start working on it, it was like, oh, man, this is too painful, and I couldn't do it. And I just sort of put it aside. And a year or so later, that prompting came back, you need to write this. And so I took about a year to write what became Moving On, Surviving the Grief of Forced Termination. As I was writing it, it was very therapeutic for me. That was the first time in writing it when I took all these ideas. I thought, what is all this? And that's when I realized this is the grief journey. And so my book is actually structured around the elements of grief. And I tell my story through talking about the denial and the anger, all those different elements. And it took me about a year to write it, and all that time, I just worked on it on weekends when I had time. And after I wrote it, I gave Scott the manuscript, and I said, read it, And if it's going to cause you any pain, that's it. Then I've done all I'm supposed to do. I've written the account. We're done. And because I was not going to bring more pain to what he'd experienced. And so he read it and he said, we got to publish this. I said, okay. And I did not want any publishing house or editor sanitizing my story. And so we self-published, and it just went out on Amazon. And the number of pastors who found that thing and wrote me after reading it saying, this is the first thing I have ever read that really describes what I've gone through or what I'm going through. The story does not, my book does not tell you what happened at our church. It does not tell you where we lived. It never names our denomination. In fact, I was still so traumatized. This is 6 years later. I was so traumatized about what had happened. I don't even call Scott by name. I mean, is that nuts or what? It's always just my husband, So what the book is built on the journey of what it took to rebuild, of what it took to work through all the grief and all the pain that came from it. But anyway, I started getting emails from pastors and their spouses who had read the book. And so I would write them back and that became life-giving to me. I looked forward to, responding to these emails. And one time a woman said, well, here's my phone number. Will you call? Well, I listened to her for 2 hours one night. And instead of that being draining after 2 hours, I was energized by it. And I thought, this is significant. I need to pay attention to what's going on here. And God used those emails and those phone calls to really plant in my heart a desire and a realization that there needs to be something out there specifically for pastors who have been forced out of their churches, because they are a very, very unique group. They're wonderful ministries, like Care for Pastors, that's for all pastors. I know of other organizations that give, they do these great conferences for pastors. That's wonderful. Pastors who've been terminated don't go to those conferences anymore. Nope. They're not going to be surrounded. They don't want to be surrounded by pastors who are employed, because you just don't get it. And until you've walked the road of termination, there's just no way. There's no way to understand what somebody goes through.
I always liken it to the scarlet letter. You're labeled this person who's been fired.
Yes.
And it's probably your fault, and you should have done something. And it's just this guilt and shame that's associated with that firing.
Oh, yes. It's all assumptions. People assume that, no church would fire a pastor without reason. In fact, there's actually termination. If you're fired in the academic world, if you're fired, you were let go for cause, and that does happen. If you're forced to resign, that really has the same pain as, in a way, of being terminated. But usually forced to resign is like there's a new pastor that's come and he brought his own staff. Or there's been a staff restructuring and suddenly your position doesn't exist. Or maybe it's a budget cut and they just can't afford you. But you've done nothing wrong and everybody knows you've done nothing wrong, but here's, you need to resign. And that third group is those who've been terminated, who have been just blindsided, and there's just been this small group who has run you off, But regardless of which definition or what happened, the assumption is that you did something wrong to deserve this. Right. And there is no way around it. That you can't. Part of what I hope I can do with Pastors Hope Network is educate the public that that this happens and the pastor's done nothing wrong. Believe it or not,
Right.
he's done nothing to deserve. Was he perfect? Heavens no. No one is. But he or she, they haven't done anything to justify the way the church treated them, which is just so detrimental.
Yeah. So your 5-year process of dealing with the firing, writing your book, which is, by the way, still on Amazon, and it can be purchased, so I encourage people to get out there and get it. It's available. So what happened after you started getting all these emails and texts and phone calls? What did that spark?
It just sparked a passion in me. And for the first time, I felt like God was calling me, that this is what I was supposed to do. And a bit, I felt a little bit like, Abraham and Sarah. Like, okay, I'm this old, God, and you're calling me to do this. A lot of my friends are getting close to retirement, and I'm going to start something brand new. I had been working full time for Habitat for Humanity, and loved that organization, loved what I was doing. But for the last year or so, it's like God just kept calling me. You're to walk away from this steady job, and you are to, do what I'm calling you to do. And so I realized at the end of that time, when I did start Pastors Hope Network, I realized God had been using my years at Habitat to train me. I didn't know I was in training, but my job there, I worked directly with the CEO. I worked directly with the accounting department. I worked directly with the program department, and I was learning. I was in boot camp for nonprofit, for building a nonprofit from scratch. I had no idea. If God had told me that, I would have probably panicked. But looking back, he was really preparing me for this. So I started talking to some key leaders in town. I went to the pastor of the largest church in town, a man I knew, and I just said, here's what's God calling me to do. And I want your feedback. And he gave me just great direction and names of people. You ought to call so-and-so and, get feedback from them. And so I just started talking to people about, this is what I feel like God's wanting me to do. Now, part of it was, what's this going to look like? What is this organization going to... Okay, I know I want to help pastors who've been terminated. What does that look like? And so, actually at that time, my husband was interim pastor at a church that was about a 45-minute drive. So every Sunday morning going to and from that church, I had a spiral notebook, and we just brainstormed and wrote down every kind of idea that came to mind. And it was all very foggy and fuzzy for a while, and then it suddenly just came into view that this should be a network of resources. And during this time, I had a guy say, you ought to get your coaching certification. And I thought, great idea. I have no desire to be a coach, that's not the passion God had given me. But I thought, I know coaches, and I know counselors. Because of my 9 or 10 years in nonprofit work, I knew people who already were experts in these fields. And so that's where I thought, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I need to partner with people who are already experts in their fields. And so that's what we do. We focus on mental health resources, because my goodness, I would have benefited from counseling 17 years ago. I desperately needed it. But when you've lost all of your income, it's hard to justify that cost. So mental health resources was one of the big things we were going to offer. Financial advising was another one to help pastors avoid really bad financial mistakes during these times of grief. And one of the long-term effects of losing your ministry position is financial instability. Because I know pastors who have blown through their life savings, you know. So we had the mental health resources, we have financial guidance, and we have employment assistance. And what it boils down to is crisis care. We are, in fact, on our website, we use the analogy of being paramedics, in that we show up at the scene of a wreck. We don't ask whose fault it was. We don't ask, what'd you do that caused this, you know. We just say, who is hurt, how are you hurt, and how can we get you on the road to healing? How can we get you stabilized? And so we show up as a as the paramedic and figure out, okay, you guys, you need counseling. So that's where we partner with Care for Pastors, and we get you guys connected. You already have the counselors. You already have that expertise.
Right.
We're crisis care. That is our very, very focused area, and we want to get families stabilized, because moving through a transitional period, it can take, I hate to tell your listeners this, it can take over a year or more.
Yes.
I heard from a new client today, and the reason the pastor reached out is even though they're already in another church, he's been there for several years, she is still dealing with the trauma that she experienced in their former church when they were let go. The impact goes on for years. And so we come in with crisis care, and then we find folks like other resources that we can hook them up to, that they can be a part of as they really go into rehab, for lack of a better term, you know?
Oh, yeah, I get it.
You know, so...
Yeah. So a pastor or his wife, they experience this, and from my understanding is that when they reach out to you, you listen to their story and you evaluate what they need, right?
Yes, and when I say we have Dave Higgle is our director of pastoral care. I could not have asked when I started until 2023. I was the only one at Pastors Hope Network, and then as we grew, my board said, "You've got to have somebody." Well, God just brought Dave. No one could be more qualified to step in as our director of pastoral care. And Dave meets with every single client, and we don't require them to tell us their story, because for one thing, they may have a couple may have to have signed a non-disclosure agreement. And so they may not be free to tell us a lot. Dave only asked enough that he can get a context and know. So, but every couple wants to tell their story. They want a safe space, and Dave is that safe space. He listens to their story, and I can tell you from we've had over 450 some odd pastors and their families we've helped so far. Tiny number of them has it been a justifiable situation.
Right.
The number of times we get these requests saying, "I was blindsided. I never saw this coming. I am reeling." That's one of the verbs that is used. I am reeling. They literally are so disoriented from that. And so Dave meets with them, hears their story, and then he explains our resources. And sometimes a client will say, man, I need that financial guidance. I need to know what to do. One time we had a client who had gotten his severance in a lump sum. That has tax implications as opposed to it being paid out monthly. So he needed to know what to do with this,
Right.
So he wanted that financial guidance right off the bat. Sometimes a client will want specific things, specific resources at the start, and months later they come back and say, "Man, I need that. I need the counseling. I'm not healing. I'm not doing well." So, and we tell them from the get-go, we are here for the long haul. So if months later you need this particular resource, yeah, come back. I mean, we're with you. Not come back. Hopefully you stay in contact with us so that we can walk alongside them.
Right. So, Deanna, what are you and Dave learning about the pastors and their families who come to you?
Unfortunately, what we're learning is that if something impacts any other family, it impacts the pastor's family as well. They are not immune from anything. You look at our society and all the issues that are impacting teenagers, all the issues that are impacting married couples. There is not a single issue that does not impact a pastor's family. It's not like they're in some protected bubble that God keeps all the things of the world from touching them. And so they are grappling with those same issues. And whereas, let's say a couple they go to church and suddenly maybe their kid gets involved in drugs. Let's just use that as an example. Well, they probably go to their pastor for counsel. And then when you're the pastor, who do you go to? You don't, it's a whole different thing. And even so, you're probably scared to go to anybody. You don't, who are you going to talk to? So that's what really is so clear and evident. Is that what's impacting our world is impacting pastors' families as well.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people see that.
No, I think too. I mean, I probably was guilty of this, expecting God to, we're committed to you, so protect us from these things. We're in the world, and you have to, when these things come up, you have to deal with them as best you can, just like anybody else does.
Yeah. Did you have an expectation that God wasn't going to allow anything to touch you guys because you were doing His work?
In some ways, I don't know if I thought of it as an expectation, except that when we were terminated, I was like, wait, what?
What?
And so maybe it was an unspoken or an unrealized expectation. I mean, there's always the faith that God is going to take care of you, the faith that He's going to give you wisdom as you follow Him. But yeah, maybe I did have a unrealistic expectation of what life was going to be like.
Where do you think that comes from? And
Well,
the reason I ask is because I think most pastors have that expectation of their families.
yeah. I don't know unless we cherry pick some verses in the Bible and claim those. I have, God says, I have a plan for you, not for evil, but to prosper you. And so you claim those things, and we're really cherry picking, that's, yeah.
Well,
So,
Deanna, as a pastor's wife, what advice would you have given yourself back, 47 years ago?
A few years ago. Yes. Yes. What advice would I have given myself? I think one of the main things I would have said is work on developing friendships outside of the church. And now back in my day, where our first pastorate, any phone call was a long distance phone call. Okay.
Right.
Young couples today may not even understand what that means to have a long distance phone call, and that you got your phone bill and you saw every single call you made, and it cost 37 cents or $1.40. It was crazy. And so it was much more difficult to stay in contact with people. But today, with the technology, work hard at building relationships. Stay in contact with people you met in seminary, those couples that you met, or in just wherever you meet people, wherever you work on those friendships outside, so that you have a broad network of friends. And I know with Care for Pastors, you have the incredible Facebook groups, social media groups that are closed and protected. And those are wonderful places for pastors and their spouses to really share and to develop some of those relationships.
Right.
I know that one of the things we have begun offering at Pastors Hope Network is these cohorts. We have one of just pastors' wives, and it's a 6 or 8 week program they go through together, led by a licensed trauma therapist. And what's come out of that is some of these women stay in contact with each other because they're meeting people who've gone through what they've walked through. But I would really encourage couples today to work on building friendships, so that when your world falls apart, you have friends who can walk alongside you. And because one of the things that happens if your church turns on you, and if all your friendships are through church, and usually that's the case, I mean, that is your social community, you lose all that.
Yes,
and so to have, I had one friend, my best friend, and she is the one person that walked alongside me the entire time. To this day, she's my best friend. But it would have helped it would have helped her if I had more than just her to rely on, So I think the friendships are key, to really work on that. Something else I would tell, especially if couples are in the seminary, while you're getting that theology degree, go ahead and get your counseling, your chaplaincy training.
CPE.
Yes. Get
Clinical
those.
Pastoral Education, yes.
Exactly. You're already there. Those classes are offered. Go ahead and get it. And the mentality is, that's a lack of faith. God comes. It's not. It is common sense. Those skills through those CPE units, you're using them as a pastor. They're going to benefit you as a pastor.
Yes.
Go ahead and get them. In the event you need to step aside from a church-related position for a while, you've got skills and training that you could easily step into a chaplaincy position.
Yes.
And then
I think that's one of the number one positions a pastor can slide into.
Yes.
If he's fired,
Right.
if he has CPE, he can slip into a chaplaincy.
Yes.
And you're not searching for months looking for a job or working a job that is not meeting your needs, because who's looking for someone who's got a master's degree in theology?
Right. I agree 100%. And yet I understand the mindset of God called me to do this. Well, it's a little, I have my public teaching certification, because back in the day, if you were going to marry a pastor, you needed to have the spouse needed to have a teaching certification so you could teach if you had to. And I think, Paul had a tent. He made tents. Paul had something to bring in income that wasn't ministry related. And so it's just a great thing to go ahead and get that training now. Now, I will, the other side, or something else to talk about with chaplaincy, is that many hospices do not require the CPE units. And so we have had a number of clients who have become hospice chaplains because they don't have that CPE training. But many hospices will acknowledge that as a pastor, you have done the work. You have sat beside somebody as they're dying. You have ministered to the family. Hospitals require the CPE units, right. But
even if you're a pastor right now, it would be good to get your CPE, because
yes.
You can do it. It's just a few hours a week.
Yep.
Over a 6-month period of time.
Right.
And it may sound like I know what I'm talking about that, because I do. Because that's how I slid into that CPE program after my church dismissed me. So you can get that CPE, and it makes you marketable.
Yes.
And you can have a salary that will take care of your family.
Right. And
so,
what I can't think of another job that spells ministry more than chaplaincy work, especially hospice. My dad passed away in 2023, and the last week of his life, I was there in the home, sleeping on the sofa. Hospice was there, and I saw firsthand the importance of a hospice chaplain, and so just the ministry is incredible. Go ahead and get it now. Get the training now.
I can tell you, it makes you a better pastor. It really does. Yep.
Yeah.
So, Deanna, as we bring this to a close today, does your ministry only cater to pastors who've been fired?
We cater to pastors who have lost their ministry position. So if they've been let go for cause, okay, so be it. We're still there to help you, regardless of why they were let go. So yes, the idea is we work with those who have lost their ministry position. Now, we've worked with missionaries before, who go through a lot of the same impact when they maybe are told, you're no longer needed on the mission field. We have, I'm trying to think, we had one client who worked for a campus ministry. So not what we'd call a pastor, but she still lost her ministry position. And so, but if we don't work with all pastors, in general. They're pastors who have lost their ministry position.
Okay. Yeah. Just want to make sure we're clear, and you don't get like 9,000 phone calls next week for people who were still employed.
And that is why we network with people, because there are incredible organizations that will meet the needs of other pastors. If we can't meet their need, we partner with somebody who can.
Good.
It's just it makes sense. Let's work together. We do work with all denominations. When for all the years we were in ministry, we were with one specific denomination, and when we were let go, it was people of a whole different denomination that little church near my father-in-law's house, who really loved on us and cared about us. And our experience of termination brought me to where today all I say is, do you love Jesus? If you do, okay, we're good. I honestly don't care about all the other differences. If you love Jesus, then yeah, we want to help you however we can.
Okay, thank you for that. So Deanna, if our listeners want to get in touch with your ministry and organization, how do they do that?
Well, our website is pastorshopnetwork.org, and if it's a minister who's lost, who's been forced out of their ministry, we have a request help button right there on the home page, and they can fill out that form. The form comes to me and to our director of pastoral care, if there's just two of us on staff, and he will reach out and take it from there. And if somebody wants to partner with us, find out more about what we do, there's just a general contact form that would come to me, and we would just meet and visit and take it from there.
I'm assuming, and that's why I'm asking, that you guys welcome support.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. We have.
How are you funded?
We have a broad base. I write grants to foundations, so we have grant support. We have a few businesses who support us. We have some churches that have us in their budget, which is lovely, because if we're in the budget, then we know what's coming in, those sure gifts that come in. And then we have just some fantastic individual donors who just love what we do. And in all honesty, Robby, when I was first talking to some key leadership about starting this organization, somebody said, you're going to have a hard time raising money. Nobody wants to help broken pastors. And I'm happy to say that is not the case. There are wonderful people who truly love pastors, who truly love ministers, and love the families, and and they back it up with their gifts. And that, so Amen. Yeah, if God calls you to do something, do it.
Man, it's a worthwhile ministry and cause to support.
Thank you.
And I know that because as partnering with you guys, that's what you do. Everything you've talked about today, you actually do. And it's really been neat for us at Care for Pastors to partner with you and Pastors Hope Network. And so I want to thank you, Deanna, for your time today. And
you bet. Thank you.
And we look forward to talking to you soon.
Yes, and we look forward to continuing to partner with Care for Pastors, as you guys are just a blessing. Both of our organizations have the same heart for ministers, which is just beautiful. So appreciate you guys.
Deanna, thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Robby.
As we close today's conversation with Deanna Harrison, I'm reminded that ministry wounds don't just affect our resume, they affect our hearts, our marriages, and our sense of identity. Whether it's the trauma of being forced out or the silent grief that follows, healing requires honesty, humility, and community. And that leads us directly into our next conversation. Because one of the most hidden areas of pain for pastors and men in ministry isn't vocational loss, it's sexual brokenness, shame, and confusion around masculinity. For many of us, we were taught what not to do, but we were never discipled in how to understand our sexuality as part of our spiritual formation. Next week, I sit down with Sam Jolman, author of The Sex Talk You Never Got. And this is not a surface level conversation. We talk about sexual formation, why it's neglected in the church, how purity culture has sometimes created more shame than healing, and why so many men reduce their sexuality to behavior management instead of understanding the deeper story beneath it. Sam reminds us that lust is desire gone mad, that your story shapes your sexuality, and that community is essential for healing. We address the hard topics: sexual abuse, emotional regulation, shame, masculinity, but always through a lens of hope, because innocence can be recovered. Brokenness is not the end of your story, and you're not too far gone. If you're a pastor, a ministry leader, or simply a man who never got a healthy sex talk, this episode will challenge you, and I believe it will set you free. Make sure you join us for this conversation. It's one you don't want to miss. Until next time, this is Robby Bolden reminding you, you're not alone and there is hope for the shepherd. Thank you very much for joining us today.